The silence after the battle was absolute. The last flickering remnants of the devourer swarm drifted as inert, lifeless scrap, colliding softly in the slow dance of dead things. The Concordance fleet, what was left of it, hung in space like a child's broken toys. And amidst it all, the army from Earth waited. They did not move toward the alien ships. They did not send signals of greeting or victory. They simply gathered. Hana's pack regrouped on the broad, flat hull of a shattered swarm carrier, their silver glow dimming to a soft moonlight sheen. The great cats and bears found perches nearby, lounging with the casual authority of creatures who owned the ground they sat on. Yuna's flock settled in a silent cloud, a constellation of sharp edges and watchful eyes. Orbiting the largest shape among them, Dot Tai Ho Dot, the great whale drifted at the center of the stillness. The brilliant bioluminescent patterns along his skin pulsed gently, like a slow, deep heartbeat. The strange metallic sheen on fur and feather and claw began to soften, not disappearing, but settling, becoming more like a part of them than a weapon worn. The work was done. The wrongness was cut out. Now there was only the aftermath, and a message to be delivered. On the bridge of the Concordance command ship, no one dared to speak. Captain Alara and Junsu stood side by side at the viewport, their breaths fogging the thick glass. They watched the impossible assembly. The creatures were looking at them, not at their ship, but through the hull, at them specifically. It was not a hostile gaze. It was the assessing, dispassionate stare of a predator considering something new in its territory. "We have to try to communicate," Jinsu whispered, his voice hoarse. "We have to thank them." "And say what?" Elara replied, her fronds trembling. "Thank you for your mercy?" "That was not mercy, Junsu. That was ecological management." Before they could act, the earth beasts moved, not to attack, but to depart. Yet their exit was not like their arrival. It was a ceremony. First, the others. One by one, the tears in space, the claw marks of reality, began to reopen. They shimmered, showing glimpses of the places they led to. The mist of a deep forest, the churn of a wild sea, the clear blue of a high sky. Hana stood, shook her magnificent fur, and gave one last, long look at the alien ships. It was a look that held a universe of meaning. "We were here. We saw you. Remember." Then she turned and led her pack in a flowing leap into the forest portal. It sealed behind them with a sound like a sigh. The great cats and bears followed, each pausing for a moment to cast that same unnerving glance toward the Concordance fleet. Then they were gone, back to their mountains and taigas. Yuna's flock rose as one. They did not simply fly into their aerial tier. They performed a last, breathtaking maneuver, a vast, swirling vortex of wings and light that contracted into the portal like water down a drain. And then the sky was empty. Only Taiho remained. He turned, with a slow, colossal grace, until his head was facing the command ship. One eye, larger than the ship's viewport, regarded them. In that eye was an intelligence that was not human, not alien, but profoundly, anciently Earth. It held the depth of the ocean trenches, the patience of continents, and the sharp, unforgiving clarity of the natural law. There were no words in that gaze, but images and feelings pressed into the minds of every being on the bridge. They saw their own planet, Lyra, beautiful and fragile. They saw the devourer swarm consuming it, turning it to dust. They felt the desperation of their plea. Then the image shifted. They saw Earth, not the cities, but the wild heart. A wolf pack bringing down an old, sick moose. A pod of orcas wearing down a great whale. A falcon striking a dove from the sky. It was not cruelty. It was the cycle. It was balance. Life and death in its proper place and time. The final image was a warning. They saw their own sleek ships approaching a blue-green world. They felt a ripple of disapproval, a vibration of territorial warning that made their teeth ache. The message was clear, simple, and final. You were prey. We intervened. Do not mistake this for alliance. Do not bring your wars, your noise, your imbalance to our world. We are the watchers. We are the balance. The forest is deep, and the sea is darker. Stay away. The message ended. The pressure in their minds lifted, leaving them gasping, shaken to their cores. Tai-Ho held their gaze for a moment longer. Then, with a final powerful stroke of his tail that sent ripples through the fabric of space itself, he turned and swam slowly toward the last, largest portal. It showed the infinite black of the deep ocean. He entered it, and the tier sealed behind him, stitching space back together as if it had never been. The Concordance fleet was alone again. But the universe felt different. Smaller and infinitely larger at the same time. Years later, on the rebuilt world of Lyra, the Concordance convened. They had studied the battle records, the sensor logs, a few blurry images. They had a name for the blue-green world, but it was not listed with the charts of potential allies or trading partners. It was in a separate file, under a different classification. JUNSU, now an ambassador, stood before the assembly. A holographic star map glowed behind him. He pointed to a small, unassuming star system. We do not refer to it by the name its human inhabitants use, he said, his voice echoing in the quiet chamber. Our historical records and the behavioral analysis of the entities that saved us have given us a more appropriate designation. He took a deep breath. We call it Terra Silente, the silent earth. It is not to be approached. It is not to be scanned from close orbit. Commerce proposals are denied. Exploration is forbidden. A council member from a species with long, sensitive ears asked, "On what grounds?" They have faster-than-light capability. Their biological science is beyond anything we have. The knowledge is not ours to have, Junsu interrupted, his voice firm. He had seen the whale's eye. He still dreamed of it. They are not a civilization as we understand it. They are the ecosystem, and we have been judged by it. Our plea was heard by the forest, the sea, and the sky. Our answer came on tooth and claw. We have been shown mercy. He paused, choosing the word Alara had rejected, but now he understood it was the right one. It was just a colder, older mercy than they had imagined. Our only respectful response is silence and distance. We mark that system as a guardian zone. We leave it in peace. The motion passed. Unanimously back on Earth, life went on. In a Siberian forest, Hana stretched in a patch of sunlight, her fur just normal fur again, though her eyes sometimes held a golden flash her pups would inherit. She listened to the wind in the pines, satisfied. The strange scent was gone from the world. Deep in the Pacific, Tai-Ho sang a complex, looping song to his pod. It was a new verse, a story of a faraway place where the water was empty and the hunger was wrong. The other whales listened and learned and remembered. On a cliff edge, Yuna preened a feather, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. Everything was in its place. The balance held. And in a small monitoring station, Minsu finally received a heavily classified, decades-late summary report. It contained no images, only conclusions. He read the final line. Planetary designation Terra Silente is considered neutral, non-interactive, and protected under the Galactic Concordance Guardian Species Act. Observation only from extreme distance. Cause: demonstrated apex predator dominance on a stellar scale. He leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. He looked out his window at the dark, whispering pine forest that pressed against the edge of the compound. He thought of the old stories of mountain gods and river spirits. He had always thought they were just stories. Now he knew they were understatements. He picked up a pen and wrote on a scrap of paper a note for himself, a truth he could never officially report. They didn't come from the stars. They were here all along. We just never knew what we were living with. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, sounding like a deep, contented sigh. The great silence of the battle was more unnerving than any noise of war. The Concordance fleet, broken and bleeding air, hung in a loose defensive cluster around their command ship, their weapons cold. They were spectators now. They watched the last act of a play they had not written, performed by actors from a world they had never known. The swarm was not defeated, but it was broken. Its vast, interconnected mind, a hive intelligence spread across 1 billion units, was shattered. The Earth beasts did not fight a war of attrition. They fought a war of nerves it did not possess, and logic it could not comprehend. They severed connections, isolated command clusters, and sowed a primal chaos that no machine could process. On the command ship's bridge, Junsu watched a tactical screen that was now useless. The blips and vectors meant nothing. He saw it instead through the main viewer. He saw Hana's pack. They were a silver-gray river flowing across the hull of a massive swarm carrier. They moved with a terrifying unity. A swarm defense drone, a spidery thing of sharp legs and cutting beams, skittered towards them. The wolves did not attack it head-on. 3 broke left, 3 broke right, moving faster than anything that size should in zero gravity. They flanked it, their paws finding purchase on nothingness. As the drone turned, confused, a great Siberian tiger, its stripes like cracks of lava on stone, pounced from above. It didn't swipe at the drone's body. Its metallic claws found the narrow join between 2 leg segments and sheared through it with a silent spark. The drone lurched, crippled. Then the wolves were upon it, not tearing, but precisely dismantling, pulling pieces apart with methodical efficiency. In less than a minute, the drone was a scattered collection of inert parts, and the pack was already moving on, leaving the debris to float away. They weren't destroying. They were butchering. Captain Ilara whispered, her voice full of a strange, sad understanding. They are not angry. Do you see? There is no rage in them. Junsu looked. She was right. The tiger's face, seen in a magnified image, showed no snarl. Its eyes were calm, focused, like a technician performing a complex task. The wolves' movements were all economy, no wasted energy. This was not a fight for them. It was a chore. A necessary correction. In the open void, Yuna's role was that of the scalpel and the distraction. The swarm tried to reform, to create a dense, spiked sphere of ships, a classic defensive formation. Yuna saw the weakness instantly. The formation required all units to focus inward. With a mental pulse too fast for any machine to predict, she split her flock. Half dove straight for the sphere, a blur of sharp edges and impossible speed. The swarm focused on them, firing a net of laser light. But the birds were already twisting away, the lasers cutting through empty space where they had been a microsecond before. In that moment of distraction, the other half of the flock, led by Yuna herself, shot like arrows into the gaps between the swarm ships at the sphere's back. They didn't attack the ships. They went for the delicate frond-like sensor arrays and communication spires. Talons and beaks of living metal snipped and sheared. The sphere of ships, blinded and deafened, began to drift apart, bumping into each other helplessly. Then the wolves and cats would arrive to finish the work, but the heart of the swarm's will remained. Deep within the crumbling formation was a vessel different from the others. It was smoother, darker, pulsing with a deep, ugly red light. It was a nexus, a brain node. From it, Thick tendrils of command energy still reached out, trying to rally the scattered pieces. This was Taiho's purpose. The great whale had moved slowly through the chaos, a dark mountain trailing his galaxy of glowing companions. The swarm's weapons had no effect on him. Energy beams diffused over his hardened skin. Projectiles shattered against the patterns of light that swirled around him. He was a force of nature, and you do not shoot a hurricane. He approached the Nexus. The Nexus sensed the threat. It gathered all its remaining power, retracting its tendrils. Its surface rippled in a concentrated beam of pure disintegration energy, the kind that could crack a small moon, lanced out. It struck Taiho square on the head. The Concordance crew gasped. Junsu closed his eyes, but Taiho did not vaporize. He did not even stagger. The beam hit the intricate, glowing patterns on his skin, patterns born of the deep sea's pressure and the star's strange signal. The patterns flared, blindingly bright. They didn't absorb the energy. They redirected it. The beam splashed across him and then reflected, scattering in 1,000 harmless directions, like light on a wave. Then Taiho opened his mouth. What came out was not a weapon. It was a memory. It was a song, but it carried within it the weight of the abyss. It carried the crushing silence of the trench, the cold that froze time, the pressure that forged diamonds. It was the sound of a place where no light ever reached, and no machine could ever truly understand. It was the antithesis of the swarm's hungry, consuming logic. The song washed over the Nexus. The ugly red pulsing light stuttered. It flickered, trying to resist, to process this assault of pure, pressurized being. It tried to analyze the frequencies, to adapt its shields. But you cannot adapt to the concept of the deep. You can only succumb to it. The Nexus's light began to dim, fading from red to a dull brown, like a dying ember. Its smooth surface cracked, fine lines spreading like ice on a frozen lake. It made no sound, but everyone watching felt its final silent scream of negation. Then, with a final shuddering pulse, its lights went out. It was just a dead, dark rock dot with the Nexus silent. The last vestige of the swarm's coordinated will vanished. What remained were just individual chunks of mindless machinery, drifting aimlessly. They were no longer a swarm. They were just debris. The earth beasts did not pursue the debris. They stopped as one. The wolves sat back on their haunches on asteroids. The birds settled on the husks of dead swarm ships, folding their wings. The great cats lounged with an eerie calm. Taiho hung in the void, his song now a soft, almost gentle hum that vibrated through the wrecks. Settling the dust of battle dot, the fight was over. It had not ended with a bang, but with a silent, definitive correction. The imbalance had been addressed. The predator that broke all the rules had been called. The work was done. On the bridge, the silence was broken only by the soft beeps of damaged systems. Junsu found he was crying, tears cutting clean lines through the grime on his face. He wasn't crying from fear or relief. He was crying from the sheer, overwhelming scale of what he had witnessed. He had seen his civilization's last hope be a prayer. And he had seen that prayer answered not by gods, but by the things that had haunted humanity's oldest nightmares and most ancient legends. The things that lived in the dark forest and the deep sea. They had not come as allies. They had come as judges. Captain Alara placed a delicate, trembling hand on his shoulder. "They heard us," she said, her voice filled with awe and a new, profound fear. "But they did not come for us. They came for them." She looked out at the gathered, serene beasts, now waiting in the starry dark. "The question, my friend, is what do they think of us now?" The silence aboard the last command ship of the Galactic Concordance was a heavy, living thing. It was the silence of exhausted systems, of broken hope, of a final breath being held. On the main viewing screen, the The serene beauty of the sanctuary world, Lyra, hung like a blue and green jewel. And between it and the broken fleet, a rust-colored stain was spreading the Devourer swarm. Commander Jun-Su, a young human liaison whose face was pale with fatigue, watched the tactical display. Blips representing the remaining ships winked out, one by one, consumed by the relentless tide. All batteries. Final volley. Target the lead clusters. Make it count, said Captain Alara, her voice hollow. Her species, the Veln, were graceful and plant-like, but now she looked withered, her vibrant fronds dull and limp. The ship shuddered as the last of its energy weapons fired. Brilliant lances of light cut into the swarm. For a moment, a chunk of it vaporized. Then, as always, the gap filled. The swarm ships were not beautiful or sleek. They were jagged, asymmetrical lumps of fused asteroid and metal, moving with a horrible, insect-like purpose. It's no use, Jun-Su whispered, his hand gripping the console until his knuckles were white. They just absorb it. Then we absorb our fate with dignity, Captain Alara replied softly. Prepare for ramming speed. We will give Lyra a few more moments. Suddenly, the ship's science officer, a being with multifaceted eyes, let out a shrill chirp. Massive spatial distortion. Bearing 090, off our starboard flank. It's not swarm signature. It's unknown. Every eye on the bridge turned. Space itself was convulsing. It wasn't the clean, circular portal of Concordance jump drive technology. This was a ragged tear, like a claw mark across the canvas of reality. It bled colors that had no name: deep forest greens, abyssal blues, storm gray silvers. A wave of pure sensation washed over the ship's crew. It was not a sound or a signal they could decode. It was the smell of wet earth after rain. It was the taste of cold air on a mountain peak. It was the feeling of focused, patient, ancient anger. From the largest tier, located in what would be the vacuum of space, a shape emerged. It was massive, darker than the void, trailing streams of glowing blue-green algae like a comet's tail. It was Taiho, but he was not swimming in water. He moved through the emptiness as if it were a sea, his great tail pushing against dimensions they could not perceive. His song, unheard in the airless void, vibrated through the hulls of the Concordance ships, a deep, physical thrum that made their bones ache. Around him, the orcas and sharks and squid flowed, their bioluminescence painting ghostly battle standards in the dark. From another, smaller tier near a drifting asteroid field, a different kind of movement. A silent, gray wave poured forth. Hana and her pack, along with the great cats and bears, ran across the surface of the asteroids. They did not float. Their paws found purchase on rock and metal, as if gravity were a suggestion they had chosen to obey. Their eyes were points of focused light. They moved as one single, sprawling organism, a fluid tapestry of tooth and claw and gleaming fur. Then, from everywhere and nowhere, came the birds. The tier above was not one whole, but 100 small ones. Yuna led them, a feathered dagger. They did not fly in the way ships flew. They fell and rose and banked with impossible. Razor-sharp grace, moving faster than any drone. Their metallic feathers slicing through the debris of battle without a scratch. The Devourer swarm, for the first time, halted its advance. Its logic, built on consumption and adaptation, had no category for this. These were not ships. They were not machines. They were not even biomass in any recognizable pattern. They registered as life, but life that violated physical laws. The swarm's response was typical. It extended grasping, tractor beam-like filaments towards the nearest creature, a great bear that was loping across a dead frigate. The bear, its obsidian claws gleaming, didn't try to dodge. It swiped at the energy tendril. Instead of passing through or being captured, the claw cut the beam. The energy dissipated with a soundless flash. The bear let out a roar that was a vibration of pure defiance, a sound that translated on the concordance comes as a burst of static that somehow meant no. Then the response began in earnest. It was not a battle as the concordance understood it. There were no energy exchanges, no shield harmonics, no missile barrages. It was a culling. A swarm vessel, shaped like a twisted hive, moved to engulf a pod of glowing orcus. The orcus didn't scatter. They swam towards it, their forms blurring. They passed through its outer hull as if it were mist, their bioglow flaring bright inside the ship. From within, the hive ship shuddered. Its internal lights flashed erratically, then went dark. It drifted, dead, its central logic node somehow extinguished. Yuna's flock descended on a cloud of small swarm drones. They didn't attack with weapons. They simply flew them, their sharpened feathers and talons, shearing the drones into harmless chunks of scrap. They moved too fast, too unpredictably for the swarm's targeting systems to lock on. Hana's pack targeted a larger vessel clinging to the side of a concordance cruiser. They flowed over its surface like liquid shadow. Where their glowing paws or metallic claws touched, the swarm ship's outer shell corroded, flaking away into inert dust. They found seams and vents, and wolves the size of ponies squeezed inside, their golden eyes illuminating dark passages. The vessel convulsed and fell silent, but the true centerpiece was Taihao. He moved directly towards the largest swarm concentration, a massive, planet-consuming tendril. He opened his mouth. From the concordance perspective, nothing visible emerged, but space around the swarm tendril warped. It was a focused blast of sound that could exist in a vacuum, a song that carried the crushing pressure of the deepest ocean trench. The swarm ships in its path didn't explode. They imploded, crumpling in on themselves like paper in a fist, before drifting apart as fine. Metallic dust. Junsu was frozen at his station, his mouth open. There, disassembling them, he breathed. Not destroying, taking them apart. Captain Alara watched, her fronds trembling not with fear, but with a profound, reverent awe. Look at the pattern, Junsu. They are not attacking randomly. The wolves go for the limbs and sensors. The birds blind and scatter. The great beasts break the core. And the whale shatters their will. It was true. The beasts moved with a terrifying, unconscious strategy. It was the strategy of a wolf pack bringing down a moose, of a pod of whales isolating a great squid, of a raptor striking for the spine. It was the oldest strategy in the universe. Find the weakness, isolate, and eliminate. The swarm tried to adapt. It generated heat beams, but the creature's altered hides dispersed it. It released corrosive gases, but the animals moved through it as if it were a light fog. It tried to overwhelm with numbers, but the earth beasts were never where the swarm predicted. They fought in 3 dimensions with a fluid, instinctive grace that no machine logic could mimic. The rust-colored tide was not advancing anymore. It was reeling, breaking apart into confused, isolated clumps that were swiftly and silently dismantled. The silent, gleaming, and furred and feathered army from the blue-green world worked with a serene, brutal efficiency. They did not make a sound the concordance could hear. They simply did. They were not warriors. They were the consequence, the answer to a play for mercy that had wandered the dark and found, not a gentle hand, but the guardians of the only balance that mattered, life and death in its proper time. The world was on the move, and very few humans were watching. In his station in Alaska, Minsu rubbed his tired eyes. The strange animal movement data was now impossible to ignore. He watched as a map on his screen lit up with thousands of tiny, glowing dots. Each dot was a tagged animal. The wolves from the Yukon were moving south in a straight line, a line that ignored rivers and mountains. Polar bears were leaving the ice, a behavior that made no sense. In the Pacific, the whale migration paths had twisted into strange, sharp angles, all converging on a single deep point. He called his supervisor. "Sir, the biotracking array is showing a Class 9 anomaly." "Global scale?" The voice on the phone was bored. "More magnetic interference, Minsu?" "We've had solar flares all week." "It's not the instruments," Minsu insisted, his voice tight. "The wolves and the bears are moving together. They're not hunting each other. They're just going the same way. Probably a forest fire we haven't detected or a quake coming. Let it go. File the report." Minsu hung up. He did not let it go. He pulled up satellite imagery over the coordinates where the land animals were heading. It was a remote, rocky part of the Siberian coast. At first, he saw nothing. Then he adjusted the filters. The heat signatures were not from fires. They were from bodies. Hundreds, then thousands of them, gathered in one place, their thermal images overlapping. Wolves, tigers, bears, lynx, even massive elk all standing still, facing the sea. A cold, logical part of his mind shut down. This was not animal behavior. This was a deployment dot half a world away. June stood at the edge of a cliff, her binoculars shaking in her hands. Below her, on a narrow beach, the impossible was happening. The tiger from her reserve was there. It stood still as a statue beside a large brown bear. Neither animal looked at the other. Their attention was fixed on the horizon where the sea met the sky. Behind them, in the tree line, she could see the glowing eyes of more creatures. There was no snarling, no growling. The air was thick with a silence that felt heavy, like before a thunderstorm. She lowered her binoculars, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was not a study anymore. This was a vigil dot at the gathering places. The change began. It did not happen with a flash of light or a loud noise. It was a slow, organic unfolding, as natural as a flower blooming, yet utterly terrifying. On the Siberian beach, Hannah felt it first. It started in her paws, a warm tingling that moved up her legs. The gray fur on her back began to stand on end, but not from fear. Each hair was catching the weak sunlight and holding it, glowing with a soft silver light. The other wolves in her pack shimmered beside her. She looked at the great Amur tiger nearby. The orange and black of its fur was deepening, the stripes becoming sharp and metallic, like grooves cut into dark iron. The bear's claws, already formidable, lengthened slightly and gleamed like polished obsidian. Hannah looked at her own reflection in a still pool of seawater. Her amber eyes were now shot through with veins of liquid gold. There was no pain, only a feeling of becoming more. More herself, more of what a hunter was meant to be. The fear sent from the stars was still there, but now it was not just a warning. It was a trail dot in the deep ocean. At the gathering point above the Mariana Trench, the water was alive with giants. Taiho hung suspended, his great body vertical in the water. Around him were pods of orcas, their black and white patterns now glowing with a ghostly blue bioluminescence. Giant squid, usually solitary, drifted like silent warships, their skin flickering with patterns of red and silver. Great white sharks circled slowly, their hides taking on the rough, textured appearance of stone, their teeth shining like chips of diamond. The change came to Taiho from the water itself. The strange signal from the stars was in the water, a vibration that resonated with his very bones. His ancient, wrinkled skin began to smooth, hardening into a flexible, dark armor. The scars from past battles faded, replaced by intricate, glowing patterns that spiraled around his head and along his flanks. They were maps of the deep sea, of pressure ridges and cold currents. He opened his mouth and sang. The sound was not the normal click or moan of a whale. It was a complex, vibrating chord that made the water hum. It was a song of the abyss, and it was a song of war. Una felt the change in the air. She was perched on a high, windswept cliff in Greenland, where birds of prey from every continent were gathering. Eagles, hawks, falcons, condors, they sat on every available ledge, a silent congress of wings. The air around them crackled with static. Then the wind itself seemed to solidify around their feathers. Una shook her wings, and instead of ruffling, her feathers aligned with a sound like whispering metal. They darkened, taking on the color of a storm sky, and the edges looked sharper than any blade. Her vision, already preternaturally sharp, deepened. She could see the heat of the ocean currents far below, could see the magnetic pulse of the planet. She could see, as a faint smear of wrongness in the fabric of space itself, the distant echo of the devourer swarm. With a cry that was ripped away by the wind, she launched herself from the cliff. 1,000 other birds followed. They did not fly as a chaotic flock, but in a sharp, precise formation, like a spearhead aimed at the sky. Back in Alaska, Minsu watched the satellite feed in horror and awe. The heat signatures on the beach were now glowing with impossible intensity. The water at the deep ocean convergence point was showing massive sonar returns that moved with purpose, not like animals, but like submarines. The air over Greenland was filled with fast-moving objects that didn't match any aircraft signature. He compiled everything, the movement data, the thermal images, the sonar pings, the atmospheric disturbances. He wrote a final frantic report, titled it Terragenic Response to Extrasolar Threat, and sent it to every official channel he could think of. It would be dismissed as the rantings of a lonely, overworked technician. But he knew. He had seen the mustering of an army that humanity never knew it had. June, still on her cliff, saw the moment of departure. The tiger and the bear on the beach below turned from the ocean and looked up, as if at a signal only they could hear. Then the very air in front of them began to waver, like heat rising from asphalt. It shimmered, tore, and opened. It was not a hole. It was a wound in the world, a ragged edge of reality that showed not another place on earth, but a dizzying glimpse of star-dusted blackness. Without a sound, the tiger leapt through. The bear lumbered after. Hana, at the head of her pack, took one last look at the familiar forest, then led her glowing silver wolves into the tier. It closed behind them, leaving only paw prints in the sand dot in the ocean. A vortex of impossible blue light spiraled open beneath Taiho. He sang one last note to the deep, a note of farewell and of promise. And then, with a powerful stroke of his tail, he plunged into the light, the army of the sea following him into the void dot and in the sky. Una saw the fabric of the heavens rip open above her. With a scream that was both challenge and claim, she folded her wings and dove. A living arrow shot from the bow of earth, leading the flock of raptors into the silent, waiting dark. The silence of space was not truly silent. It hummed with the faint echoes of dead stars, the whisper of solar winds, and now with a new terrible sound. It was a signal, but not of simple data. It was a raw blast of emotion, a final collective scream sent bleeding into the cosmic dark. The galactic concordance, a fragile tapestry of a dozen advanced species, was unraveling. Their last fleet was a scattered collection of broken hulls and flickering shields, falling back towards their final sanctuary world. Behind them, coming like a slow, rust-colored tide, was the devourer swarm. The swarm did not communicate. It did not bargain. It simply consumed. It took apart worlds, ships, and living beings, breaking them down into base components to fuel its own endless, mindless expansion. The Concordance had tried everything: energy weapons, gravity bombs, logic viruses. Nothing worked for long. The swarm adapted, learned, and kept coming. Their science had failed. Their armies had fallen. All that was left was prayer dot, so they prayed to the stars. They took the last dregs of their combined power and forged it into a single desperate broadcast. It carried no coordinates, no tactical data. It carried only the pure, unfiltered essence of their feeling, the choking terror of extinction, the crushing weight of despair, and the final, fragile filament of hope. They cast this plea outwards, in every direction, a message in a bottle tossed into an infinite, uncaring ocean. They did not expect an answer. They simply could not die in silence. On a small, blue-green world on the spiral arm of an unremarkable galaxy, the plea began to arrive in the deep, cold black of the Pacific Ocean, where light was a forgotten memory, a pressure greater than mountains weighed down on everything. Here a being named Taiho drifted. He was a sperm whale, old, his massive head scarred from battles with giant squid. He lived in a world of sound, painting pictures of the deep with clicks and song. The Concordance's signal did not come as a sound he could hear with his ears. It came as a vibration in the water itself, a trembling in the bones of the world. It was a wrongness. It was a sound of hunger that did not belong. It spoke of a vast emptiness, of life being erased not for food, not for survival, but for nothing at all. To Taiho, whose kind sang complex histories, and whose world was a careful balance of hunt and life, this was an abomination. A deep, resonant note of disapproval thrummed in his chest. On the frozen, endless expanse of the Siberian taiga, the air was so cold it hurt to breathe. A she-wolf named Hana led her pack through the deep snow. She was lean, her fur thick and gray, her eyes the color of winter amber. She was listening to the forest, to the crunch of snow under paw, the whisper of wind in the pines, the distant heartbeat of a sleeping moose. Then a new scent arrived on the wind. Not a smell, but a feeling. It was the metallic tang of fear, the sour note of panic, the cold emptiness of hopelessness. It was the scent of a herd about to be run off a cliff. Hannah stopped, her pack freezing behind her. She lifted her muzzle and tasted the air again. This fear was not from her territory. It was from elsewhere. It was vast. It was coming for everything. Her lips pulled back from her teeth in a silent snarl. A pack did not let such a threat go unanswered. High above the clouds, where the air was thin and the sun burned fiercely, a peregrine falcon named Yuna rode a thermal current. The world below was a patchwork of green and brown, a map written in river and stone. Her mind was a razor of instinct, the curve of a wind current, the distant speck of a pigeon, the angle of the sun. The signal came not as a sight or a sound, but as a sudden, sharp pain behind her eyes. A flash of terrible, blinding light, followed by a crushing darkness. It was the feeling of the sky being torn away. It was the end of all flight, all hunt, all freedom. It was wrong. With a shriek of fury that was lost in the thin air, she banked hard, turning not toward prey, but toward the source of the wrongness, a point she felt in her bones, far out over the ocean. It was not just them. In the tall grasses of the savannah, a lioness paused in her stalk, her tail twitching. In the dense jungle, a great tiger lifted its head from the stream. In the dark caves, bears stirring from sleep felt a deep, restless unease. In the ocean's sunlit zones, great white sharks turned with new purpose. Even the vast, slow minds of ancient creatures, the great elephants and the colossal squid, stirred with a sense of trespass. The signal was not meant for them. It was a product of technology far beyond the comprehension of any beast on Earth. But its message was primal. It spoke of the end, and Earth's apex predators, the honed instruments of 1 billion years of survival, were the planet's ultimate listeners. They heard the scream in the universe's fabric. They did not understand war, or fleets, or alien civilizations. They understood imbalance. They understood a predator that did not follow the rules, that did not kill to eat, to protect, to live, but only to consume until nothing was left. This was an offense to the very order of life. A consensus formed, wordless and deep. It flowed through the roots of the mountains, through the currents of the sea, through the pathways of the air. It was a simple decision, as natural as breathing. This wrongness would be met. This trespass would be answered. On Earth, humanity noticed little. A technician in Alaska named Min Su, watching a bank of flickering screens in a lonely outpost, saw a series of anomalous readings. Unusual magnetic fluctuations. Strange, coordinated movement patterns in tagged animals. He sipped his coffee, frowning. Probably another solar flare, messing with the instruments. He filed a low-priority report that would be read by nobody. In a biosphere reserve in Korea, a biologist named June was checking camera traps. She scrolled through images. A deer, a family of raccoons, a fox. Then she stopped. The next 100 images, from cameras spread across 50 kilometers, showed the same thing: predators. The tiger she was studying was not in its usual territory. It was moving west fast. The bears were on the move. The eagles were gone from their nests. A cold finger of wonder traced down her spine. This wasn't migration. This was a muster, but they were just observers. The actors were already in motion. Taiha was rising from the abyss, his great tail driving him upward, a low, determined song pulsing out ahead of him, calling others. Hannah was running, her pack a gray shadow flowing through the trees, joined now by other shadows, a bear, a lynx, all moving in the same direction, ignoring each other. Yuna was a feathered bullet, slicing through the sky, and she was not alone. From every continent, the hunters were coming. They gathered at forgotten places, a point in the deep ocean where tectonic plates groaned, a silent, misty valley where stones lay in ancient patterns, a storm-racked cliff overlooking the raging sea. They did not know what they would do. They only knew they must go. The stars had cried out for a savior, for a warrior, for mercy. They had not asked for a wolf, a whale, or a falcon. But mercy on Earth had always worn many faces, and often it wore very sharp teeth. As the last of the Concordance's ships prepared to make its final, hopeless stand, the answer to their plea was already gathering. Not in the void, but in the deep, living heart of a world they had never known existed. The silence before the storm was ending, and it was filled with the beating of wings, the pad of paws on soft earth, and the deep, ancient song of the abyss.